Welcome to the Westport Library. Today's program will begin momentarily. Supported by Verso Studios, created locally and shared with the world.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to the Westport Library this evening. And thank you for just being you today. So, as we know, most people collect things. Some collect books, others buy rare plants, and some enjoy decorative figurines, for example. Ryan Matthew Cohn and Regina Cohn prefer collecting mysterious and sometimes macabre objects, and tonight they're going to share a few of their favorites with us. If you don't know them, Ryan and Regina are the co-founders of the Oddities Flea Market, fellow Westporters, and here tonight to tell us more. You'll have time to ask them questions as well as purchase their new book, The Witch's Door, while looking at the actual door. And ours is the only audience on this book tour to actually have the door with us. So it's a really exciting night. So without further ado, Ryan and Regina.
Good evening.
Whoa, that's very bright.
Yeah.
We're usually in that room 212 over there working
Working.
every Monday and Tuesday.
Wearing sweatpants.
Well, thank you guys for coming. I recognize a bunch of people. Some are, neighbors and other people I know from Westport. But what you might not know about us is that we are basically like the Dracula couple that lives in Westport, up on the hill in the Victorian dilapidated mansion. And you might not know that if you're just looking at us, because yes, we're usually wearing our Equinox clothing and being normal citizens, law-abiding normal citizens. But the truth of the matter is, we are these crazy maximalist antique collectors. I think that's the best way. Is that how you would describe us?
I think so. I mean,
Accurate.
you are.
Well, I am, yeah, which is very funny because Regina has more recently become somewhat of a minimalist. And we're lucky enough, and you guys might know this building. We have this building on our property. I might as well I think it's further ahead. But anyways, we have a chapel from the 19th century that is just on our property. It was moved there in 1950 or so. And it actually used to be almost next door to the library on Imperial Avenue, where, the police station, the building that's next door, which is probably some kind of like medical facility at this point, when they built the parking lot, they moved this building to our house. And the deacon of Greens Farms Church apparently lived there and had sermons. And now it's filled with antiques.
But luckily for me, we also have a little cottage. And so that has become my little minimalist space, because our house, if you go to the next slide, it's a lot. There's a lot going on in there. And it's like, 4,000 square feet of a lot. And when we first met, we lived in Brooklyn, and probably, barely 1,000 square feet?
That was actually, that was our second house in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
I think there's probably a lesson in all this. Don't collect too much or your wife will move out to the other house on your property.
At least it's still on the same property, though.
But yeah, I've been collecting ever since I was a youngin'. I might still be a youngin', but I've been collecting since I was probably like 2 or 3, and I have very early memories. And when we've been approached to write a book since we've known each other, and even before that. And I think I immediately thought, we have to have this beautiful coffee table book. But what happens with an obsessive collector is that your collection is always evolving. And what might be interesting one year, the next year, it's not gonna seem all that interesting, at least to me. And we've been included in, I think, 3 or 4 books at this point. And every time I look at these books now, I'm like, oh God, look at this place. It's so unsophisticated, or what subject matter we were focusing on at this point, we aren't even interested in at this point, so.
I feel like we have a bit of a permanent collection now, but for the first 10 years that we were together, it was true. Things came in, but then you sell them for something better. So I think that's why it was hard to start off doing a coffee
Yeah, you're
table
constantly evolving. So anyways, Chronicle ended up coming to us and they said, hey, why don't you guys put together a book of your favorite stories from being on the road? Because what would happen is we'd be at like a dinner party or a family affair, and someone would casually ask, you guys seem really interesting. What do you do for a living?
The dreaded question.
It was a dreaded question because there's a lot of different things that we do, and we never really knew how to answer it. And I think this book really gave us an opportunity to explain what we do. And we talk about it in detail. And it was fun because the book really evolved as we started to write it. So, I think it took about a year or so. Mm-hmm. And then what would happen is I would go buy a museum, and then I'd buy another museum, and then it kept happening where like the craziest story that ever happened to us would happen, and we'd have to write a chapter about it. And so it was a therapeutic experience, going into our head and going like, okay, is this interesting enough? And we would test it out on friends and people that we were just meeting at UPS and stuff. Like, hey, this thing happened one time where I went to this doctor's estate sale, and he ended up giving us 20 skulls or something. And we were desensitized to the stories, but people seem to find them very interesting, and that's what this book is.
Also, what makes the book really interesting is the two different perspectives, because I, for one, was never a collector. I still don't consider myself a collector. Now I'm like the keeper, right? I watch over everything. But I was the business mind. So it's two different perspectives of the same situation, but they're two very different perspectives. So you'll hear Ryan's side, and then you'll hear my side, and it's actually pretty funny.
It's very funny because I get really amped up and I delve into the history behind every single piece. We probably live with about 2,000 or 3,000 pieces, if that's even humanly possible.
I mean, this is just one room on the second floor that was supposed to originally, I think
it's a changing room.
It was a changing room.
And now it's like a paintings
Memento
piled
mori
to the
room.
high room. And that's what happens. You'll procure a large collection, and you have to kind of very quickly figure out what to do with it. And I think the good thing about having moved to Westport is we finally have this thing called space. Mm-hmm. When we lived in Brooklyn, I had like 4 storage units across, different areas of Brooklyn and New York. I had a studio that I was supposed to be working in doing jewelry work for Ralph Lauren. Instead, it became this like depository that went up to the ceiling filled with antiques. Yeah. But I think one of the things that we are asked pretty frequently is, how did you guys meet? Like, how did Bert and Ernie meet? That's what someone called us the other day, which I thought was funny.
We're still trying to figure out which one is Bert, which one is Ernie. Because I don't think there's a compliment in there either way.
Well, anyways, it doesn't make any sense. But how did we meet? Because it's actually a relatively interesting story.
So it's so embarrassing. So I was a fan of his TV show, Oddities, which some of you may have seen on the Discovery Channel. That was a long time ago now.
11 years ago?
At least, right? I mean, when I met you, it was already over.
I got fired.
They got canceled, 99 episodes.
I just found out today Sesame Street got canceled. Today.
Ryan's like devastated.
I don't watch it that often, but when I do, I like to know it's there. Anyways, go on.
So we actually met because Instagram was like new to me, and I started following you because you were selling items on there.
She slipped into my DMs, I think they call it.
I did. No, I actually emailed you like an adult. But it was because he posted a beautiful Kapala skull. I'm not sure if you have a slide. There it is. Yes. And so I was very interested in that for my collection. Now, mind you, I had no oddities. I didn't know what an oddity was until I saw this TV show, but I wanted that. And actually, the one I wanted even had more jewels. It was more green and red. And was it this one?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't remember. There's been many. So I emailed Ryan, and I had no idea how much these things were. So, of course, he contacts me back, and he tells me the price. And I almost died. I was like, I don't even know what to say right now, how to get myself out of this situation, because it had too many zeros. So I obviously declined. And then Ryan was clienteling me for like 6 months. Like anytime you got in something similar, you were sending me photos. And I was trying to act like a baller, but honestly, I could never have afforded one. I was in retail in New York City. There was no way, unless I didn't pay rent. So the joke is now that I own them all, but back then, couldn't afford one.
So we were engaged in the Parisian catacombs, which we're actually going back to in February. We haven't been back in 6 years, which is pretty wild. And we've been married for 10 years.
Yeah.
So that was nearly 11 years ago.
But the point is, we met because he Googled me, and then he knew who he was talking to, and then we just started flirting, and that was it.
Yeah, we were married very quickly, and we were married on TV. We were actually part of this TV show, and I'm not going to tell you the name.
Yeah, we don't want anybody looking for it.
If you delve really deep into the internet, you can find it. The episode, I believe, is on YouTube. But any hoot, I wouldn't suggest that to anyone, just as a thought in my head here. We got married, and then the plan was to, stop everything that we were doing because my life was very hectic with buying and selling and everything else that we do, and go on a honeymoon to Hawaii. We went to Kauai. And everything was going great. We were supposed to leave this week in December or something, and I get to Regina, the dreaded call. The dreaded call was this museum that had closed down in 1922 and then reopened in Belgium at the time. It was called Castin's Panopticon. And what it was a true oddities museum, but it was mostly anatomical wax models. And these were sensational pieces at the time. They would teach you about different diseases, abnormalities, deformities, and such. And this aristocratic German fellow by the name of Max Wax, we call him in the book, purchased about 200 pieces from that collection. There was a bunch of sub-collections that went up for sale. He bought them, and he wanted to renovate his mansion in Munich, and was selling these pieces, and the middleman was in New York, so I was called, and we went to go try to negotiate. Well, the collection was like $500,000, I believe, and they gave me that ultimatum. It was almost like a movie, like, hey, you either buy this by Friday, we were leaving on Saturday, or I have other parties that are interested in purchasing.
People don't wait around when they have something like that. So yes, you're given a very short time period to come up with a lot of capital. And unfortunately, it just fell on our honeymoon. And so we still went, but Ryan was nowhere to be seen. So I was sitting on a beach pretty much by myself. You couldn't leave because you needed service, because of course, anytime we left the resort, that's when somebody would call. And so it was sort of a disaster. He still owes me a trip to Hawaii. But in actuality,
that's our honeymoon.
Look, there was a nice moment.
It's funny to do a book talk and just have a picture like
It's
this.
embarrassing.
It's not very serious.
Keep going.
But anyways,
so large.
I was like negotiating this deal right before we left, thinking like, all right, this thing fell through. But I ended up telling the guy, I didn't tell you this, but I was like, all right, we're gonna take it. And I was just gonna figure out how to come up with $500,000.
That's usually how it works.
Yeah, I didn't want to use my own capital, and we don't do loans. Like, we've always just procured collections on our own. So I don't have like an investment firm that I deal with when I'm buying high-priced collections. And so I told him we'd take it, and then I just was on my computer like every second of the day trying to find a buyer. And at the very last minute, right as we were like getting on the plane, a friend of mine was very good friends with Tim League of Alamo Drafthouse. And thankfully he was like, all right, I think I can do it. And we ended up selling the collection to Alamo Drafthouse, and they had me come in as the curator of this collection. And it's a bar/museum, that's us in Paris. This is the wax collection. When we went to go see it in Munich, we were there for 48 hours?
So basically, we get home from our honeymoon, ditch the bikinis, grab winter clothes, get on a flight, and we were in Munich for 48 hours figuring out the money part and then how to ship it back to the US, which is very tricky when it's wax, especially because most people think heat is your enemy, but it's actually the cold.
Yeah, it can actually crack the waxes. So a lot of care had to be, given to these anatomical wax figures that survived from the mid-19th century to now. And it's like the last thing you want to do is be the person that destroys one of them. So anyways, long story short, we ended up opening up this fabulous bar that's still in downtown Brooklyn. You can go to it.
Has anyone been
House of Wax.
to House of Wax?
This is it here.
Oh, it's stunning. It's amazing.
These are all different death masks that were taken at the time of someone's death as a form of memento mori. I think we have, I forget, Kaiser Wilhelm is in there, and there's a bunch of different famous people. Mozart, these are some ethnographic figures, and this is one of my favorite pieces. So I think in the back of my mind, one of the reasons why I wanted to procure this collection, sell it, and then, set up this museum was there was a bunch of pieces I was gonna keep for our own private collection, which
So
is
that's
always...
usually what we do. We keep the best for us, and then we get rid of the rest.
So anyways, that's our wax story. I would say that was one of the biggest collections that we ever procured together. And it wasn't until, I'd say, 5 years later or something, 6 years later, that we ended up coming across another really unique collection. And if someone were to ask me in this book, and I don't know how many of you guys have read the book yet, if you haven't, we have some for sale right over there. My favorite story in the book is a story called Nick Parmesan. Nick Parmesan was this fellow that we knew from Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn. And I started doing business with him, and there was a picture, there he is. Nick was an ex-NYPD sergeant, and he was a very strange guy because he was a very intense person, but he was also probably the most keen collector I've ever met in my life. Obsessive compulsive to the max. Like, this guy, little did I know, had this 3-story walk-up. He probably had about 4,000 or 5,000 objects in this 1,200 square foot apartment.
But hoarder style.
He became so difficult to deal with, and he was spending a good $20,000 with me, probably every single month. At least that, if not more. And I was, selling him things and, refurbishing things for him. And it was a great deal, except he was a negotiator. And that's what he did for the NYPD. He actually helped take down the New York mob, which is ironic because I think his family was in the mafia.
Awkward.
It was Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn. If you've ever been there, it's like filled with legitimate mobsters to this day because we ended up moving there. So anyways, I cut the guy off because I just couldn't deal with him anymore. The money was great, but he would call me at like all hours of the night, text me. We'd come back from trips and he was just sitting there up on our stoop with a tray of chicken parmesan. And the reason he was called Nick Parmesan, and we called him this back in the day, was because his family owned this neighborhood deli. And they were straight from Italy. I don't even think his parents spoke any English. They were straight from Italy. And they made this chicken parmesan, and it was so good, he would actually use it as a bargaining chip.
It was to die for.
And
Yeah.
so,
I was scared of him, but then I tried the chicken.
well, he was very nice to you, and I think you had an easier relationship, but I couldn't deal with it. Anyways, let's fast forward. I think I blocked his number. We end up moving to Carroll Gardens from Greenpoint,
Years
Brooklyn. And sure enough, the first day we move in, he knew the guy that owned the house that we bought, and he was knocking on the window.
Nick's back.
So Nick was back, and my stomach kind of dropped because I hadn't seen him, but there was something a little different about him. He was a little bit more emaciated.
He was sick.
He wasn't looking that great. And for the first time, Nick was willing to let go of parts of his collection, which he had never done before. This guy didn't get rid of anything. And I mean nothing, because he ended up passing away. And I'm just keeping this kind of quick because I know we don't have a ton of time. But when he passed away, nobody really had ever been up to his apartment, so they didn't know what it looked like.
Right? You had not really made it through the door
I had been up there 3 times.
to help him lift something.
Yeah, there was an 18th century cemetery gate, and I helped him, one guy, and another guy get it up the stairs to this 3rd-story walk-up. And I remember when I walked in, I nearly fainted because you barely could open the door. It was just filled. And it was filled with some of the greatest things I've ever seen, but mixed with cobwebs and...
Yeah, so unkept.
Yeah, like kitty litter and, bottles of pee and like, it was things like an 18th century pair of Italian statues that were worth like $100,000 next to dirty stained underwear. I mean, it was few and far between, I guess. Anyways.
And we would become very intimate with his house because after he passed, of course, Ryan contacted the family. And I don't think we originally thought we were going to buy it. I think we were more concerned because we had sold him so much over the last decade and longer that we knew what he had. And if you're not an expert, you don't know what's in that apartment. And so I think we were more freaked out, like they were going to get rid of things. Yeah, that was just like a corner. just to give you an idea.
Oh, this was already organized. It was much messier than this. I didn't put the pictures in the slideshow. But anyways, we had negotiated with his sister because an antique store was going to come in and buy everything, probably for absolutely nothing. And I said, nope. Here, I'll pay you right now. I had a suitcase of cash, and we made a deal, shook hands, and I said, all right, now I got to figure out how the hell to get this stuff out of here. Because, it was 3 stories up.
It was also in the middle of the pandemic.
Middle of the pandemic, and I had to put together like a crew of people immediately before they changed their mind. And that almost happened in the middle of purchasing all of this stuff.
But there was something else wild happening. And so that's why you have to read this book, because you can't even make this stuff up. We knew we had 3 days to get rid of everything. So part of the deal was, yes, we will allow you to buy the collection, but you have to clean out the whole entire apartment. So it wasn't just, oh, take what you want. It was, you take it all.
Oh, we had like a 10-person crew. Some people were cleaning, the other people were like carefully or not carefully taking things out, loading them into a truck, and then I think I was there probably 10 times. That's how many times it took. And then finally I ended up hiring a professional company. It was really hard to find.
We knew we couldn't do it. Physically, we couldn't do it.
Well, then during the pandemic, it was really hard to find movers that would take on such a job. But, long story short, we got everything out, and as we're going through, because there was so much, we noticed this old door. And I'm like, what the hell is this thing? The great thing is that Nick kept really meticulous paperwork on almost everything that he had in that apartment. It was either a transcript from eBay or an auction house where he purchased something, but he had a piece of paperwork. However, the paperwork was in probably 20 boxes of those, the banker boxes that you see at trials. And we had to start going through that. Meanwhile, I'm just trying to go through the antiques and say, all right, this is this. They're very obvious, but certain things like this door, for instance, I didn't know what the hell it was. It just looked like an old door. But I knew that if Nick had it, it had to be something.
So we didn't pay much attention to it for, like a year. At least a year. It just was in storage.
Yeah, and then at some point, and I had to be very careful with this paperwork. It was like covered in grime.
It was stained.
Yeah, I come across these crumbled up papers in one of the boxes. Sure enough, that's it. Stained with like blood and all kinds of.
It was probably coffee.
No, I think it was blood. And it was like all ripped, and it looked like a scene out of a movie. And it says, 17th century witch's door from New England. And it had the full provenance as to the collector who he had procured it from. The general age and where they thought that it came from. And then I started going crazy. I had to know everything about it. And the book is really interesting because we discuss the witch's door at the very beginning of the book, the middle of the book, and towards the end of the book, because we're still trying to figure out exactly what it is. We've shown it to the Peabody Museum. They've authenticated the age, that jerk off on Pawn Stars.
Oh,
sorry,
cool.
I hate to say it like that, but the worst dude I've ever met, we took it on that show, and he's like, oh, the screw's been changed, it's not real. He was drunk also.
Yes.
Don't watch that show,
Drunk.
it's terrible.
He was drunk.
But we're still trying to figure out exactly what it is, if it should be housed in a museum rather than in our basement, because we actually don't even have a place to showcase it.
It's not something that I would just have in my living room. Let's be real.
True, and it's one of the few pieces in the collection that actually gives me a strange feeling when I'm in its presence. And I say that about almost nothing. And we've had very few stories where,
Do you have a close-up? Because you can't see the carvings.
I have this photo. Oh, that's our chapel building.
Just an average Friday for us.
We spent the day levitating, but this is the chapel that used to be right next door, and it was originally a boathouse.
It was not black.
It was not black, and Sterling Hayden, I think, used to stay in there every so often. And interestingly enough, I found a tire that was up top that I think they probably used so that the front of the boat didn't go through the building. It's like a buffer. And we didn't pay any attention to it other than the fact that it was super high up and it needed a very tall ladder. And one day I was like, you know what? I'm gonna take this thing down and make you a tire swing out of it.
Yes, I was so excited.
So I finally get up there, I cut it down, thing falls down on all of my stuff, and I turn it around, and I'm pretty sure it's signed by Jean-Michel Basquiat.
Yeah.
So one day I'm gonna sell this tire and hopefully have paid for my
We've never told this story, so now I can't believe you said it.
It was a weird pen name that he used to use in the 80s. Aaron, I think, right?
It was a different name.
And it said, didn't it say like, fuck Basquiat?
Yes. So it said, it definitely had a curse, so that's
Yeah.
why it didn't become my tire swing.
Something something like that. And I showed it to a couple different experts on Basquiat, and they're like, it's possible. I don't know or don't know, but we still have it.
We'll get to it eventually.
It's one of those things, once again, that we've been living in Westport now for 5 years, I think, right?
4.
We've been here for 4 years. And I still have pieces that I've had for probably 10 years. I don't know what it is because it takes a lot of time and effort, and you often need to bring in experts on the subject. How are we doing on time?
You're asking me.
We have 5 minutes? Oh. 5 minutes to talk or 5 minutes until questions?
Okay.
Okay. I just wanted to talk about haunted things real quick.
Yes, we feel like that's the #1 question that we've received over the last decade. Well, way before you met me, I'm sure. Everyone wants to know if anything
everyone
is
wants to know.
haunted in our house.
That's the first question that we're asked when someone comes into the house, because if anyone was going to be haunted, it would be me. I don't even know about you. I think it would be me.
No, it would be you.
A lot of the subject matter has to do with death, and some of the subject matter has to do with grisly death or, murders. Murders meaning like, tribal murders, or, like a warrior would fight another warrior, and I have one of their remnants. And once again, if someone was going to be haunted, it would be me. And so I've always been open to the idea of spirits existing. I just never experienced it. And so in Brooklyn, I would try to find ways to how could I get myself haunted, or how could I see a spirit? And there's a funny story in the book where one day, I think I was on the phone or something talking to you. And it actually might have been before you, I'm not really sure. But we had these glass French doors in our Greenpoint apartment. And I just wasn't really paying attention. You know when you're not really paying attention and you see something out of the corner of your eye? Well, that happened to me. And I was like, oh my God. I thought I saw this little French girl walk by. And it's always like a little French girl walking by that's a spirit. And she was wearing like little stockings and had like Goldilocks hair. And it turns out it wasn't a little French girl, it was me. I saw my reflection. The door had like moved, caught my reflection, and I guess I must have looked like a little French woman. So I think if I were to really, truly believe in hauntings, and I do, I'm not saying that I don't, I would have perpetuated that and said, oh yeah, I saw a spirit walk by the other day. It was this little French girl walking around my apartment. My apartment's plagued by this little girl. But it wasn't, it was just me. So I always said, like, if you believe in something enough, you can make it probably happen. But fast forward to Westport and to our house from, from 1876? Mm-hmm. We live in a historical home. It's in the Greens Farms area. And I said, surely this place is gonna be haunted.
I get no vibes.
No vibes.
Nope.
Until about, 2 years ago?
I think it was only
3 years ago?
I don't think it was that long ago. Where are we going?
Sorry.
Oh, God. That's where we're going.
So have you guys been to Monger's Market? It's in Bridgeport. It's, for those of you that don't know about it, it's this indoor flea market. And you can buy pretty much anything there, literally. You can buy antique doors, you can buy architectural salvage, rare antiques, and apparently 12 ventriloquist dummies from the 1920s. And my friend was selling these. It was just a box. I just happened to notice it. It was behind him. I said, whoa, dude, I want those. How much are they? And I think they were cheap. They were like $200 for all of them. And my thought process was, all right, well, I'll sell them to my friends and I'll keep 2 of the best ones. And I did that. And those are them in all their glory. And let me just tell you this right now.
I'm not looking at them.
She doesn't like to look at them. We have to be extremely respectful of these 2 dolls, because anytime that I've been disrespectful, something really awful happens. Or if I'm talking about them at one of these book Q&As.
Usually something weird happens.
Yeah, the volume will go out, or there will be a glitch, or the lights will go off, or something strange. And it hasn't happened for a while, but it might just be because we haven't done one of these.
So we were done writing the book, And what had happened is there's a chapter on dolls, because Ryan likes to collect dolls. And the photographer was over our house shooting objects for the book. And when he got to the dolls, he said, no way. He's like, no way. And mind you, he's like 6 feet, tattooed, hair to hair. He looked at those things and he was like, I'm asking permission. And of course, goofballs, Bert and Ernie, we're laughing at him. We're like, oh, that's so silly. I mean, you just shot a shrunken head and this skull and that skull, and you're asking permission to these dolls. And we laughed, and within seconds, their jaws fell out. The mandibles just dropped.
So the it's a very easy construction. You can actually see on the doll with the red lips, his mouth, I kind of had to keep sticking it up there. But basically it's a little mandible that has a metal bar across, and it sits on the head, and there's a string that's attached to it. And when you move the string back and forth, that's what makes the doll speak with your ventriloquist voice, because that's what kids used to do for fun. Now they're just on their phones. But ventriloquism, I think, was like a thriving pastime.
Before TikTok.
Yeah, before TikTok. That's what all kids were doing. Anyways, when we went to go shoot these, both of the cords were cut. No one has been near my dolls except for like the cleaning person.
Not even.
And she does not go near
touch
them. Oh, she doesn't go near anything. I don't even know how she cleans her house. She's very superstitious. But she's also meticulous and amazing, and she's been with us since the very beginning. But anyways, their jaws kept falling out, and I know I have to make this quick. They ended up haunting the shit out of us.
From that day forward.
Yeah, both of our cars exploded. Our heating systems both broke, even though I had just purchased a new one.
We had a leak. The leak, yep.
Yep, water started going all over my antiquarian book collection. Our venue closed down in LA. And look, I know there's a lot of coincidences, but they all had to do with the dolls wreaking havoc, or their jaws coming out.
So the publisher knew this was going on, because now we were in like the last editing stages of the book. So we were able to put this story in at the end. The dolls are no longer with us, if you're curious. We do not have those dolls. Ryan and I have never given away anything in our entire careers, but they went to somebody who, that's their job. They house haunted items. And I believe the woman who has them has become very TikTok famous because of those dolls. But at the same time, she's been haunted and has had issues.
There was basically a curse, I think. That's what she seemed to think, because she started having all this awful, well, I mean, she has a lot of financial success from the doll's story, but all this awful stuff started to happen to her, to the point where she ended up texting me and saying, dude, I don't know what to do with them, and I'm an expert on this stuff. Would you be interested in possibly taking them back? And I said, hell no. You can burn them for all I care. I'm just kidding, I love you.
Yeah, careful.
But anyways, you can read about it in the book. It's sort of an open-ended story, because it was happening as we were finishing with the book. And we thought we were done. We actually had handed it to the publisher.
And she was like, no.
Edited.
We're pausing, you're writing what has happened so far, and that's going in.
And so anyways, that's kind of how the book ends. There's a lot of other things that I would talk about. There's this beautiful collection that was called the Richard Harris collection.
That's the last big collection that we procured.
Yeah, it was about, 1,000 pieces of the rarest memento mori and death-related artifacts that to ever be compiled by one individual. And this chandelier that you see behind me is 13 feet tall. And
it weighs a ton.
Yeah, it's made out of plaster bones. It was made by an English artist by the name of Jodi Carey. And she made 3 of these, and Richard procured all 3 of them. And it weighs 1 ton. And this one piece is taking up that whole entire chapel building. It's that many boxes. So I'm gonna have a party maybe
in the spring.
You guys all need to come, and we're gonna put together this chandelier.
I'm sure someone's gonna drive by and be like, what are those people doing on the lawn?
We're gonna hang it in the middle of the chapel, because the chapel doesn't look that big in these pictures, but it's actually enormous. It's like Bugs Bunny's house. Remember, he used to go into his Bugs Bunny hole? And he would go down there, it was like this beautiful palace. That's how the church is.
Okay.
Anyways, anyone have any questions? I would think we'll direct questions over there.
We need to take questions over by the mic, so if you have a question and would like to line up, come on over, just because we need to capture your question for the recording. Thank you.
She just lit up when she said that.
Yeah.
Is it the dolls?
I know.
Hi.
Hi, former Brooklynites, now live in Norwalk in a beautiful black house.
Oh,
Nice.
And I have a very simple question for you. We love black houses. Do you know what brand and what name of the paint you used to paint your house?
Yeah, it was Benjamin Moore. Oh, gosh. You know what? I have to admit, there's a house.
We stopped and asked somebody.
I
and knocked on
stopped at their
someone's
house. I
door.
think they were scared of me when I first showed up. But they had there's this black house right around the corner from us, over kind of near where the Dunkin' Donuts is on Post Road. And it's this little house from the 1700s. And I just knocked on the door and I said, your house is fabulous. What is the black? And it was a Benjamin Moore color that's used for exteriors. And that's the color we ended up using. And I made sure to do a semi-gloss and then gloss on the trim. Right. And yeah, it looks really cool. We did our cottage building and the chapel that same color.
Would it possibly be either Mysterioso
I don't think so.
or
I think you
Witching
would have
Hour?
remembered that name.
It's Witching Hour.
Witching Hour, yeah, that's what our house is.
Yeah.
Witching Hour. So we have that in common.
I'm like,
right on,
Westport's
man.
just going to become black houses.
It's the thing, yeah.
There's not many, but we stopped at another one. Oh God, I forgot what part of Fairfield it is, but it's a farm. And we also, I stopped and
That
knocked
road's
on the door.
incredible.
Yeah, that's like more of a gray wash, but that's typically what I'll do. I do that all around Westport, actually. I've found some really amazing antiques in this town.
Oh, for sure.
I showed up to Phil Donahue's house. There's a family living over there, and I just knocked on the door. Cleaning person showed up, and
And they just give him things.
Yeah, she was like, hey, come on in, have some wine.
Very cool.
And she's like, yeah, take whatever you want. And I got these amazing antiques in my house. So that's not like a big trade secret. I think anyone could do it, but that seems to be my move around here. Because there's a lot of places that end up getting torn down. And so I'll always say like, hey.
What is the house on the ocean that we
Oh,
scored?
the Sasko Hill house.
I'm sure you guys know the Sasko Hill house.
Do you guys know that house? It's at the very end. It's this Tudor mansion right on the water, and it has a very dark history, actually. And a very famous actor has moved into the property. And when they were renovating that property, I went and did the same thing. I knocked
showed
on the
up.
door. I said, hey, are you guys getting rid of any architectural salvage? And the guy's like, no. But then I realized that they were tearing down one of the buildings, and the actual, not the owner was there, but the person that was doing a lot of the renovations, he's like, yeah, man, there's tons of it. Take whatever you want. And so I ended up pulling some of the greatest pieces in my collection out of that house.
Awesome. Just want to let you know, Benjamin Moore has a new color. It's
Do you work for Benjamin Moore?
No, not at all, not at all. I just love black houses.
Me too.
It's called Very Dark.
Love it, man.
Yeah, that's it.
Right on. Oh, hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good.
Fabulous artist over here, by the way. You guys probably know.
Yes, I'm inviting you to my house, and then in exchange, I would love an invitation to your house.
Absolutely.
I'm just saying that in front of all these people.
That's a done deal.
I'm assuming you guys are fans of Rod Serling.
Sure.
Yeah, because you know he lived, I think he lived in Westport for a while. The thing I was going to ask you, and I was just thinking about this, like, oh, I wanted to ask you a question, any question, some question. And I was thinking of the question and realized that I couldn't answer it myself. And I have very much the same taste without quite as much taste as you have. But I mean, I don't, anyways, there's a fine line between hoarding and collecting, as we know. Can you talk a little bit about what it is about these things that appeals to you, or have you ever thought about it, what it is about this sensibility that you have that appeals to you?
Yeah, you know, that's something that's asked very frequently to me. And in fact, I just did an interview for another book last week. And the question was, what is it about death, or the image of death that you gravitate towards? Because it's always been that way. Ever since I was very young, it seemed to be either an actual skull or, you know, skull imagery. And I don't really know how to answer it, other than I've always found anatomy really fascinating. I can certainly relate to it personally because I have a skeleton inside of me, as does everybody else. So I always get kind of weird when someone's like, that's strange, you collect skulls and skeletons. I'm like, well, you have one, you know, right? Right inside of your body, you also have a skull. So it's not that foreign. I just seem to find solace in the image of the skull. And I think for me anyways, not let you answer the question, but I just find the historical value very interesting. With any object, but it just so happens that I tend to collect images of skulls, skeletons.
But there's so much more. I mean, it's not just skeletons, it's the
death and how different cultures have, dealt with it, or their versions in artwork. I think that's the fascinating part, because every culture has their own way of dealing with death. I think us as a society today are very timid with it, and it's become very much a business at this point. We don't celebrate it as much through art as we used to do, especially in like the Victorian era, when we had, memento mori hair wreaths of your family's hair. Or we would keep, I know we keep urns of ashes now, but there was really beautiful art that was created in the Victorian era that would celebrate one's death, or, their life, actually. It just so happened that, now we look at it and it looks kind of creepy.
Not to me and not to you, right?
No, not at all. I don't find anything really all that creepy.
Thank you so much.
Just dolls.
Certain dolls, right?
Certain ones, yeah.
I have a collector question as a serious collector myself. The nature of being a collector is that you have friends who are also collectors, and there's a certain friendly competition that also goes on. So do you have any anecdotes about beating out fellow collectors for a specifically very desired piece?
I mean, I was told something by one of my mentors. He said, anyone ever comes into this store and says they're my friend, they're not. There are no friends in business. And I am very friendly, and I definitely share the wealth. And especially when you get, I think, to a certain point where you have most of the things that you ever wanted as a collector, then you're more willing to let things go. And I don't care anymore if I don't win something at an auction. But it can be very cutthroat. And I'm very serious when it comes to something, especially if I really want it. To a point. Something's like $20,000 and it ends up going for $50,000. I'm probably not going to buy it. But I remember I used to take you to auctions, live auctions, and Regina was ruthless, man. If she could see the person bidding on something that she wanted.
Oh, my heart just...
Yeah, it would become this.
And it's funny because I would always
thing.
talk you like, oh, no, this is going to be calm. This is going to be cool.
She was like, don't spend too much money, right?
And then I go wild. I'm like, they're not beating me. It's terrible. I will just keep going for it. I've had to calm down because it can be very competitive. And then sometimes I'm like, what am I doing? I'm just trying to get this over somebody. Do I even want it that bad? But you have said that you've lost friends, though. Like somebody stopped talking to you because they know that you ended up getting something.
Oh, numerous times.
Yeah.
I just procured this one painting by an artist by the name of Julien Duvassel, and it's from the late 19th century, and it's one of the most known images of us. I think it's called Two Skulls, and it's an original charcoal, and every collector that collects memento mori lusts after this piece, and I got the original one from the Richard Harris collection, the artist that had the chandelier. And this one guy put a picture of it up, and I said, "Oh, I just procured the original of that." And he's like, "Wait, what?" I have it. I'm like, "No, you don't. I have it. I have the whole auction history. It's hanging in my house right now." Literally unfollowed me, blocked me, will never speak to me ever again. And he's a prominent figure in my field. So yeah, it's really tough. I'm a very lone person. I talk to Regina, and I talk to my buddy Frenchie, and that's really it.
In a similar vein, do memento mori people ever get together and have conventions? Because many collectors belong to organizations that get together, have an annual convention. Is there anything like that for memento mori collection?
Yeah, it's called the Oddities Flea Market, which is our business. We bring together, it's not just people selling things necessarily, it's a whole community of people that are interested in, not specifically memento mori, but, oddities as a whole, if you want to just, put it into one genre.
We talk about it in the book. It's the way that I found to leave my 20-year fashion industry job to work with Ryan. I had to come up with something, and it ended up being the Oddities Flea Market, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about.
We just did one in New York, actually, a week ago.
Yep, we do like 4 times a year, LA, New York, Chicago. This year we're doing San Diego, well, in 2025. And it's like 75, 80 vendors of the macabre. And yeah, there's a huge community out there. I think that the TV show Oddities really brought attention to it, but now it's thriving.
Yeah, there's a lot of people interested in the subject.
Hi. I'm curious if you've ever had any pieces in your collection worked on by any professional conservators.
A ton of them, yeah. And then I do a lot of restoration. It's something that I specialize in, depending on what it is. But, you know, if I get a very rare painting, for instance, I typically won't mess with it. I'll take it to an actual conservator. And I work with one of the conservators at the Spanish Museum in New York. And she's very expensive, and she takes a very long time to restore paintings, but she's absolutely incredible. And some of these works could be hung, you know, in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They're done so well.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else? How much time do we have?
I don't know. How are we doing?
Yeah, I think we're gonna, once again, thank our guests here for a great program. And we're gonna move on over to the signing table. So feel free to purchase a book, and you can have your book signed and ask any more questions. Thanks so much for coming.
Thanks, guys. That was really fun.
Thank you.